Welcome to the Community and Neighborhood Livability Focus Area for Plan Fort Collins. I'm Timothy Wilder of the Advanced Planning Department, and with me is Pete Ray, also with the Advanced Planning Department. We're going to provide a short presentation on this focus group. This is one of 7 topic areas, and this deals with land use issues as well as housing. This topic covers the city structure plan, that is places of emphasis, whether it's the continuation of city plan or other focus. It deals with infill and redevelopment. It deals with community gateways, neighborhoods and housing, and finally, nature in the city. Pete is going to kick it off by talking about the city structure plan and the places of emphasis.
What we're looking at here with this exercise is 3 choices or places of emphasis with the existing city structure plan map. The first is really a continuation of the existing map without a lot of change. And the second is focusing more on the central city spine, what we refer to as the Mason College corridor from downtown to south of Harmony. And lastly, a focus on our commercial activity centers distributed throughout the city. So in looking at the existing structure plan map, without a lot of change, we're looking at carrying forward the existing vision. We still think that's valid. Looking at more vacant lands for most of the new housing and job development over the next 20 to 30 years, with some redevelopment and development in new activity centers. So what that would look like in this map, the green areas show our vacant lands, vacant buildable lands. I think that most of the jobs and housing would locate within those areas, with some development happening within the targeted redevelopment areas shown in red. In comparison, the second choice is more of a focus and emphasis on directing that new development within the Mason College corridor, we refer to as the spine, from downtown to south of Harmony. And finally, the third emphasis areas within the commercial activity centers, and those are primarily located with our grocery-anchored shopping centers, the Foothills Mall, and some of our larger community commercial centers throughout town. So really the choices are to, again, look at a continuation without a lot of change, looking at our existing structure plan and how that builds out over time, focusing new development along that central city spine, and the third choice is a focus of that new development along the commercial activity centers. For all 3 of those choices, we're looking at more redevelopment and infill within the community. And what that would mean is we're looking at building heights, taller buildings within these areas, larger development. We'd look at ways to make that happen, looking at redevelopment and infill strategies to implement new development within these areas. So what type of support would be needed? An example, downtown we have the General Improvement District. In North College we have the Urban Renewal Authority, tax increment financing to support new development. We're looking at the appropriate size and scale of buildings as an example, looking at different building heights. And we're also looking at mixed use buildings, bringing in residential, office, and retail within the same building, higher density residential within infill and redevelopment. And also we need to look at coordination of infrastructure to support a larger scale development. And finally, what that looks like in relation to existing development, looking at design compatibility. We're going to show you some examples of some photo simulations. This first one is at Drake and Mason on the west side of the Kmart Shopping Center on the Mason corridor, existing development, and after for this activity center, looking at taller buildings, mixed-use buildings, pedestrian-oriented design, close proximity to the transit connections along Mason corridor and the rest fixed routes throughout the city. This other simulation is at Mulberry and Mason Sports Authority, existing situation, and just a concept of what it could look like with infill and redevelopment. Again, taller buildings, ground floor, retail, commercial, and office, pedestrian-oriented, and within close walking distance to the transit corridor. In this next simulation, this is at Magnolia and Mason, existing 1-story buildings, and what it could look like with change is 3 to 5-story buildings, mixed use, residential, and office along this corridor. This next simulation is on the east side of the Kmart Shopping Center. Again, a single-story existing shopping center development pattern. And this simulation will show a sequence of bringing in different levels of intensity with this new development. So smaller block size, on-street parking, better amenities at the street level for pedestrian enhancements, changing the single-story buildings to multi-level, 2, 3, up to 7 stories within this spine redevelopment area. So again, this sequence, you can see the buildings are getting taller up to finally just a concept showing what 7 stories would look like. A very interactive pedestrian scale street front with this new development compared to what we had existing. We're also looking at different allowed building heights within this central spine redevelopment area and within activity centers. Current zoning allows within activity centers up to 5 stories. These photos show a different range of building heights up to 5 stories. And then within the Mason Corridor spine area, there's an allowance for up to 7 stories. So this is just some examples of what some buildings could look like with mixed-use buildings, street frontage, pedestrian-oriented, residential, office, and retail within the same buildings. And just finally, an example of in the downtown area of a half a block, what a potential concept for a redevelopment project could look like with buildings stepped down towards the existing neighborhood areas in the downtown. Really the choices are, should we be looking at different building heights, maybe an increase of the allowable heights within these targeted locations, and provide enhanced support for infill and redevelopment projects through additional incentives. Next, we're going to be looking at our community gateways. And we have numerous plans that set visions for the primary entryways into the community, whether they're on I-25 or along the 287 College Avenue corridors, and looking at potential new design standards to implement these gateways. This slide illustrates the 5 primary gateways along I-25 from the Windsor State Highway 392 exit on the south all the way up to the Mountain Vista interchange on the north by Anheuser-Busch. And then along the College Avenue, we have the North College Avenue Gateway near Willickson and College, and then South College beginning along the Carpenter Road up to Harmony as part of that southern gateway. This slide shows a concept illustration of the Windsor-Fort Collins future interchange, what it could look like with some improvements. And this next slide shows a vision sketch of the South College Gateway and what it ultimately could look like. So really the choices are, what is your preference for a priority for what we should really be focusing on with these gateways to establish more of a formal city gateway? And what would it take to provide additional standards to implement the ultimate vision for these different gateways?
Now I'm going to cover neighborhoods and housing section. And under this topic, we have various issue areas. One is neighborhood transitions, a mix of housing types, that is single family up to multifamily type dwellings. Neighborhood conservations, those are areas that should be conserved and where limited changes should take place. And then finally, housing affordability. With this first topic, neighborhood transitions, what we're talking about is with infill and redevelopment, how do we provide the appropriate transitions between bigger and taller buildings with existing neighborhood areas or areas that are at lower intensity and scale that are not going to change? First of all, the Land Use Code does provide many standards for developing compatibility inside and outside of the downtown. And so the question has been raised, are there some additional standards or changes that are needed to ensure a greater level of compatibility than what is already provided? And these are a couple slides about how some of the ways you can provide these transitions. These are transitional type buildings where they might be lower in scale than what's allowed through the Land Use Code, and they would provide a better transition in some cases to existing neighborhood areas. This next slide is just illustrative from another community, but it shows basically where we have a transit corridor, maybe analogous to the Mason corridor with a little more intensity, where you're transitioning through different types of land uses and different heights and density to areas of single-family residential areas. And then finally, this is another illustrative concept that applies to the Mason corridor, where you have taller buildings along the corridor itself, transitioning to lower buildings and different types of uses near neighborhood residential areas. So the question here we're asking is for you to consider various aspects of transition, that is design, height, use, and spacing, and perhaps what is needed to provide better transition between these developing areas along the spine or in activity centers and neighborhoods. The next topic deals with the housing mix, and what we mean by that is lower or higher density housing. And we're targeting specifically higher density housing and talking about where it is appropriate to have multifamily townhomes, smaller lot, single family residential within the community, where it should go and what areas should stay the same without changes. Secondarily, where are protections needed to prevent some inadvertent change in neighborhoods. So the questions that are being asked here are looking at areas that we might already have zoned for higher density residential, and should we reevaluate those areas and then identify areas where we need to provide better protection for neighborhoods. The next one deals with affordable housing. It's a big issue. We've made a lot of great strides in providing affordable housing in the community. However, that's not enough. There's still a great need out in the community. Our local funding levels have decreased for affordable housing, and the question is, how do we provide sufficient sources of local funding? There is some federal funding that's available through the community development block grants, but we need to look at additional sources of local funding. So the question here is, should we try to maintain existing affordable housing programs at the current levels without dropping them too low, and should we expand the affordable housing programs that are in place? Now, I'm moving on to nature in the city. This deals with more of the environmental aspects of buildings and the urban form. And there are two concepts under this: alternative landscape treatments and the Poudre River near the downtown, how we deal with that interface with the urban form of our community. We mean by nature-friendly landscape requirements, this not only applies to landscape but to buildings and how they might incorporate more natural kinds of features within their development. So how do we really bring in nature into the everyday life of residents, not just in natural areas, but within the urban form, within public plazas, within the buildings, within the landscaping? Rather than turf, are there some more native landscapings that we should provide for some more localized habitat and for the enjoyment of the residents? The Poudre River, a lot has been discussed about the Poudre River near downtown, what should happen, what should not happen. There's a lot of history and there's been a lot of discussion around this. There are existing protections for the river through habitat preservation or floodplain protection. There are very few parcels with development potential. So the question is, are there additional protections that are needed? These are a couple concepts of how our current land use code would allow some development near the river in one specialized location, and also another image from another community of how they've dealt with this interface between development and the river and provided some level of protection. So the question is, should we establish more nature-friendly landscape requirements? And secondarily, are there additional activities and protections that are needed for the Poudre River? So that concludes the presentation. We'd invite you to share your feedback. We'd invite you to go to the website that's listed here, complete the online survey, read the policy choices document that's listed, which goes into a lot greater detail on these issues, and then download a comment form that you can resubmit to the city so we know what your thoughts are on this topic. Thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoyed the presentation.